The groundwork for the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia was laid long before the first German soldier stepped onto Czechoslovak soil. In the early 1930s, Czechoslovakia was a stable and prosperous democratic nation. However, the rise of Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler's aggressive foreign policy ambitions cast a shadow over Central Europe. Hitler sought to expand Germany's borders and gain control over territories he deemed vital for his vision of a greater Germany. Czechoslovakia, with its substantial ethnic German minority in the Sudetenland, became an early target. On September 29, 1938, the infamous Munich Agreement was signed by Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, and France. No representatives from Czechoslovakia were invited to the negotiations. In this agreement, the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with a significant ethnic German population, was ceded to Nazi Germany. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who famously declared the agreement would bring peace for our time, believed that appeasing Hitler would prevent war. However, this was a catastrophic miscalculation. Czechoslovakia, already weakened by the loss of the heavily industrialized Sudetenland, was left defenseless. The Munich Agreement essentially opened the door for further German intervention. President Edvard Benn resigned on October 5, 1938, as his government was humiliated by the betrayal of its allies. The Munich Agreement did not satisfy Hitler's expansionist aims. Just months later, on March 15, 1939, German forces marched into what remained of Czechoslovakia, occupying Prague without a single shot being fired. By this time, the Czech military was in disarray, and any real resistance was unfeasible. The result of this occupation was the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia into separate entities. The region of Slovakia declared its independence on March 14, 1939, becoming a puppet state of Nazi Germany under Josef Tiso, a Catholic priest and politician. Meanwhile, the Czech lands, including Bohemia and Moravia, were absorbed into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The occupation of Prague was a symbolic victory for Hitler, as he took control of the last remaining independent Slavic state in Central Europe, solidifying his power over the region. The creation of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia marked the official beginning of direct Nazi rule over the Czech lands. On March 16, 1939, the Protectorate was formally declared by Hitler. The German Reichsprotektor, an official appointed by the Nazi government, was placed in charge. The first such official was Konstantin von Neurath, but in 1941 he was replaced by Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most feared figures in the Nazi regime. Under Nazi occupation, the Czech population experienced severe repression. The Nazis dissolved Czechoslovakia's political institutions, abolished civil liberties, and imposed strict censorship. The Czech economy was integrated into the German war machine, and its industries were exploited for the benefit of the German army. The brutal Nazi regime also targeted intellectuals, politicians, and anyone suspected of harboring anti-German sentiments. Thousands of Czech citizens were arrested and executed or sent to concentration camps. Reinhard Heydrich, who was appointed Reichsprotector in 1941, quickly became known as the Butcher of Prague. Heydrich's brutal administration aimed to Germanize the Czech lands, and his policies included widespread repression, mass arrests, and executions. He also initiated plans to eventually eliminate the Czech population through forced assimilation, deportation, or extermination. One of the most infamous episodes during the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia was the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, which triggered one of the most brutal reprisals of the entire war. On May 27, 1942, Heydrich's car was ambushed in Prague by two Czech resistance fighters, Jan Kubis and Josef Gabčík, who had been trained by the British Special Operations Executive, SOE. Though the assassination attempt did not kill Heydrich immediately, he died of his wounds on June 4, 1942. In retaliation, the Nazis unleashed a wave of terror. The most infamous atrocity committed was the destruction of the village of Lidice on June 10, 1942. In a horrific act of collective punishment, all men in the village were executed, while women and children were sent to concentration camps or extermination camps. Lidice was razed to the ground, and its name became a symbol of Nazi barbarity. A similar fate befell the village of Lizaki, where inhabitants were also killed, and the village was destroyed. The assassination of Heydrich and the Nazi response also marked a turning point in Czech resistance. The brutality of the Lidice massacre and other reprisals intensified anti-German sentiment and encouraged more active involvement in underground resistance movements. Resistance to the Nazi occupation took many forms. The initial response was largely passive, as the overwhelming force of the German military made open rebellion impossible. However, over time, underground resistance groups began to organize, coordinating sabotage, intelligence gathering, and support for the Allies. One of the most significant resistance movements was the UVOD, Central Leadership of Home Resistance, which brought together various anti-Nazi factions. Resistance was not confined to armed actions. Many Czechs engaged in non-violent forms of defiance, such as distributing anti-German propaganda, helping Jews escape, and providing information to the Allies. The Czech resistance worked closely with Czechoslovak forces in exile, including the government in exile, led by former President Edvard Beneš, who had fled to London. The exile government coordinated with the resistance and provided support for operations such as the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. The Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia also brought the horrors of the Holocaust to the Czech Jewish population. Before the war, around 350,000 Jews lived in Czechoslovakia. With the establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, the Nazis implemented anti-Semitic laws and policies. Jewish property was confiscated, and Jews were gradually excluded from public life. In October 1941, the Theresienstadt Terezin Ghetto was established as a transit camp for Jews from the Protectorate. While the Nazis portrayed Theresienstadt as a model ghetto to deceive the international community, the reality was far more grim. It served as a way station for Jews who were later deported to extermination camps such as Auschwitz. Around 140,000 Jews passed through Theresienstadt, and tens of thousands died there due to starvation, disease, and mistreatment. By the end of the war, approximately 263,000 Czech Jews had perished in the Holocaust. In contrast to the Czech lands, Slovakia became a nominally independent state under Nazi protection. Led by the authoritarian government of Josef Tiso, Tiso's regime was closely allied with Germany and implemented many of the same repressive policies, including the deportation of Slovakia's Jewish population to concentration camps. However, not all Slovaks supported Tiso's government. In August 1944, a major anti-Nazi uprising broke out in Slovakia, known as the Slovak National Uprising. The uprising was a coordinated effort by Slovak partisans, communists, and elements of the Slovak army, with support from Soviet forces. Although the uprising was ultimately crushed by German troops, it demonstrated significant resistance to Nazi rule within Slovakia. Czechoslovakia's liberation from Nazi occupation came in 1945, as the Allied forces advanced into Central Europe. The Soviet Red Army played a crucial role in liberating the Czech lands, with Prague being liberated on May 9, 1945, one day after Germany's formal surrender. Soviet troops entered the city, greeted as liberators by the local population. The end of Nazi occupation was a moment of relief and celebration for Czechoslovakia. But the country faced significant challenges in the post-war period. President Edvard Beneš returned from exile and was reinstated as head of state. The pre-war borders of Czechoslovakia were restored, but significant population changes occurred. Germans in the Sudetenland, who had supported the Nazi annexation, were expelled in a series of forced deportations. Around 3 million Germans were expelled from Czechoslovakia in the immediate aftermath of the war. Summary: Legacy of occupation. The Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia was a period marked by repression, violence, and genocide. The Munich Agreement of 1938, followed by the full occupation in 1939, effectively dismantled Czechoslovakia as a sovereign state and subjected its people to years of terror under Nazi rule. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, the destruction of Lidice, the decimation of the Jewish population, and the Slovak National Uprising were some of the most significant events of this occupation, shaping the Czech and Slovak memory of World War II. The end of the war brought freedom, but also left a nation deeply scarred by the atrocities it had endured. In the years following the war, Czechoslovakia rebuilt itself, though the shadow of both the Nazi occupation and the subsequent rise of communist rule after 1948 continued to shape its history for decades. The story of Nazi occupation remains a stark reminder of the dangers of authoritarianism, unchecked aggression, and the profound costs of appeasement in international diplomacy. Thank you for listening. For enthusiasts of historical ephemera, visit history-collectors.com to find collectibles that might complement your collection. You can own a piece of history. Before you go, a simple way to support the efforts of this channel is to like, subscribe, comment, and share.